The morning sun cast long shadows across the remote training facility in the Nevada desert. Sarah Martinez knelt behind a concrete barrier, her fingers working methodically on the precision rifle scope mounted before her. The metal was warm to the touch, heated by the early desert sun that promised another scorching day ahead. She had been at this for 3 hours already, fine-tuning the optical equipment that would mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. At 28, Sarah had earned her place among the most elite marksmen in the military, though few knew the full extent of her capabilities. Her official record showed service with the 75th Ranger Regiment, but that was only part of the story. The small insignia on her equipment case told a different tale entirely, one that very few people in the world would recognize. The scope caps she was adjusting bore a barely visible etching, so subtle that most would dismiss it as a manufacturing mark. 3 intersecting lines forming a triangle with a single dot in the center. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than a quality control stamp. But to those who knew, it was the mark of the Phantom Unit, a special operations group so classified that its very existence was denied at the highest levels of government. Sarah had been recruited into the Phantom Unit 18 months earlier, pulled from her Ranger Battalion after a mission in Syria that had gone sideways. While her official after-action report described a textbook hostage rescue, the classified version told a different story. When the primary plan had collapsed and 3 operators were pinned down by enemy fire, Sarah had improvised a solution that saved lives and completed the mission objective. Her unconventional thinking and exceptional marksmanship had caught the attention of someone very high up the chain of command. The Phantom Unit operated in the spaces between official military operations and intelligence work. They handled situations too sensitive for regular special forces and too dangerous for traditional CIA operatives. Their missions never appeared in briefings or official reports. The operators themselves were ghosts, officially assigned to other units while carrying out work that could never see the light of day. Today's training exercise was designed to test new equipment and techniques before deploying them in the field. Sarah and her 5 teammates had been running scenarios for weeks, preparing for a mission that would take them deep into hostile territory. The details were compartmentalized, but she knew enough to understand that failure was not an option. As she made final adjustments to the scope, Sarah noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A figure was approaching the training area, walking with the distinctive gait of someone accustomed to carrying heavy gear over long distances. She glanced up briefly, noting the man's athletic build and the way his eyes constantly scanned the environment. Military, definitely, but not someone she recognized from the facility staff. The stranger wore civilian clothes, khaki pants, a plain polo shirt, and worn hiking boots. But everything about his bearing screamed special operations. His movements were economical and purposeful, and despite the casual attire, Sarah could see the telltale signs of someone who stayed in peak physical condition. A faded tan line on his wrist suggested he usually wore a tactical watch, and the way he positioned himself showed he was automatically identifying cover and escape routes. Sarah returned her attention to the scope, making microscopic adjustments to the windage and elevation settings. The weapon system she was working with was cutting-edge technology, combining traditional optical magnification with digital enhancement capabilities. It could compensate for environmental factors, calculate ballistic trajectories in real time, and even account for the Coriolis effect on extremely long-range shots. The equipment was worth more than most people made in a year, and Sarah treated it with the respect it deserved. Every component had been custom-fitted and calibrated specifically for her shooting style and physical characteristics. The rifle itself was a work of art, built by master craftsmen who understood that a sniper's weapon was an extension of their body and mind. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see the stranger standing about 10 feet away. Up close, she could see more details that confirmed her assessment. His hands showed calluses consistent with rope work and weapons handling. A small scar above his left eyebrow looked like it came from flying brass or shrapnel. Most telling of all were his eyes, alert, calculating and holding the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing combat up close. The man gestured toward her equipment setup. His voice, when he spoke, carried a slight southern accent and the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. He asked if she was having trouble with the scope, offering assistance in a way that suggested he had extensive experience with similar systems. Sarah politely declined the help, explaining that she was running through final calibrations before a qualification shoot. The man nodded approvingly, noting that proper preparation was the difference between professionals and amateurs. As he spoke, his gaze moved across her equipment with the practiced eye of someone who knew quality gear when he saw it. It was then that his attention fixed on the scope caps. Sarah watched as his expression changed subtly, a slight narrowing of the eyes and a barely perceptible straightening of his posture. The casual friendliness remained, but underneath she sensed a sudden tension like a predator that had caught an interesting scent. The man's eyes met hers, and for a moment neither spoke. Sarah felt the weight of assessment, as if she were being evaluated by someone with the authority to make life-changing decisions. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and careful calculations. Finally, the stranger extended his hand in introduction, giving only a first name and mentioning that he was visiting the facility as part of an equipment evaluation program. His handshake was firm and brief, the grip of someone who understood that physical contact could reveal as much as words. As they talked, Sarah found herself impressed by the man's knowledge of ballistics and marksmanship techniques. He spoke with the authority that came from years of practical experience, dropping casual references to weapon systems and operational procedures that most civilians would never encounter. Yet something in his manner suggested he was holding back, sharing only surface-level information, while probing for details about her own background and capabilities. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah's team leader, who called her over for a mission briefing. As she packed up her equipment, Sarah noticed the stranger watching her with renewed interest. His attention focused particularly on the way she handled the sensitive gear and the security protocols she followed. The briefing room was stark and windowless, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that cast sharp shadows on the walls. Sarah took her seat among the 5 other members of her team, each carrying the same air of professional competence that marked elite operators. The mission commander, a grizzled veteran known only as Colonel Hayes, stood at the front of the room beside a large display screen that remained blank for now. As they waited for the briefing to begin, Sarah found her thoughts returning to the encounter with the stranger at the training range. Something about the man had set off alarm bells in her mind, not because he seemed threatening, but because he had clearly recognized something significant about her equipment. The way his demeanor had shifted when he spotted the Insignia suggested he knew exactly what it meant. Colonel Hayes activated the display screen, revealing a satellite image of a mountainous region that Sarah didn't immediately recognize. The terrain was rugged and unforgiving, with steep valleys and rocky peaks that would make movement difficult even for experienced operators. Red markers indicated known hostile positions, while blue circles marked potential landing zones and extraction points. The mission parameters were straightforward in concept, but complex in execution. A high-value target had been located in a remote compound, and intelligence suggested he was planning to move within the next 72 hours. Traditional military assets couldn't be used due to political sensitivities, and the location made a conventional assault impractical. That's where the Phantom unit came in. Sarah's role would be overwatch and precision fire support. She would position herself on a ridge overlooking the target compound, providing cover for the assault team and eliminating any threats that emerged during the extraction phase. The shot distances would be extreme, pushing the limits of even her considerable abilities, which explained the intensive equipment preparation she had been conducting. As Colonel Hayes outlined the timeline and logistics, Sarah mentally cataloged the challenges they would face. The altitude would affect bullet trajectory and her own physical performance. The rocky terrain would make finding a stable shooting position difficult. Weather reports indicated possible wind gusts that could throw off long-range shots by several feet. The briefing continued with detailed discussions of communication protocols, contingency plans, and rules of engagement. Each team member had specific responsibilities, and success would depend on flawless coordination under extreme pressure. Sarah had participated in dozens of similar operations, but the classified nature of this mission added an extra layer of complexity. After the formal briefing concluded, Colonel Hayes dismissed the team with orders to complete final preparations and equipment checks. As Sarah gathered her notes and prepared to leave, the colonel called her aside for a private conversation. In a voice barely above a whisper, Hayes informed Sarah that their mission had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Someone with significant influence had been asking questions about the Phantom unit's capabilities and current operations. While the source of the inquiry remained unclear, it was important that all team members maintain absolute operational security. Sarah assured her commander that she had followed all protocols and hadn't discussed mission details with anyone outside the authorized chain of command. She mentioned the encounter with the stranger at the training range, describing his apparent interest in her equipment without revealing any classified information. Colonel Hayes listened intently, asking specific questions about the man's appearance, behavior, and apparent level of knowledge. When Sarah mentioned his reaction to seeing the insignia, the colonel's expression grew serious. After a moment of consideration, Hayes instructed Sarah to write a detailed report of the encounter and submit it through encrypted channels within the hour. The rest of the day was spent in final preparations. Sarah cleaned and inspected every component of her rifle system, testing each adjustment and verifying that all settings matched her recorded data. The scope that had drawn the stranger's attention received particular attention, as it would be her primary tool for engaging targets at distances exceeding 1,000 yards. Her ammunition was custom-loaded to exacting specifications, each round carefully matched to her rifle's unique characteristics. The bullets themselves were precision-manufactured projectiles designed for maximum accuracy and terminal effectiveness. Sarah had personally tested each lot of ammunition, recording velocity data and grouping measurements under various conditions. As evening approached, Sarah made her way to the base communications center to submit the required incident report. The facility's intelligence officer, a sharp-eyed captain named Rodriguez, reviewed the document and asked several follow-up questions. Like Colonel Hayes, Rodriguez seemed particularly interested in the stranger's apparent recognition of the Phantom unit insignia. After completing the paperwork, Sarah returned to her quarters to get some rest before the mission launch. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by thoughts of the upcoming operation and nagging concerns about the mysterious visitor. Something about the entire situation felt off, as if pieces of a larger puzzle were moving just beyond her perception. The next morning brought news that changed everything. During the pre-mission briefing, Colonel Hayes announced that higher command had assigned an additional observer to their operation. The observer would remain at the base command center but would have full access to mission communications and real-time intelligence feeds. Sarah felt a chill of recognition when Hayes described the observer's background. A decorated veteran with extensive special operations experience, currently working in an advisory capacity for Joint Special Operations Command. The description matched her impression of the man from the training range perfectly. As the team prepared for deployment, Sarah found herself wondering if the encounter had been as accidental as it had seemed. The timing was suspicious, and the man's apparent knowledge of classified equipment suggested access to information that few people possessed. Whether he was friend or foe remained unclear, but his sudden appearance in their operational chain of command couldn't be coincidental. The helicopter flight to the insertion point gave Sarah time to review her mission parameters one final time. The target compound sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, accessible only by a single winding road that would be heavily monitored. Her shooting position was on a ridge nearly 2 miles away, requiring her to hike through difficult terrain while carrying 60 pounds of specialized equipment. Weather conditions at the target area were marginal, with scattered clouds and variable winds that would complicate long-range shooting. Sarah had trained for exactly these conditions, but the margin for error would be razor-thin. One miscalculation could mean the difference between mission success and the loss of American lives. As the helicopter approached the drop zone, Sarah performed final equipment checks and reviewed her mental map of the operational area. The insignia that had drawn so much attention was hidden beneath protective covers, but she remained acutely aware of its presence. Whatever game was being played at higher levels, her focus had to remain on the mission and the safety of her teammates. The helicopter touched down in a clearing barely large enough to accommodate its rotor disc, kicking up clouds of dust and debris that stung Sarah's eyes despite her protective goggles. She was the first to exit, immediately moving to establish a defensive perimeter while her teammates disembarked with their gear. The pilot kept the engines running, ready for immediate departure once the team was clear. Within minutes, the helicopter was gone, leaving only the fading sound of rotors and the sudden silence of the mountain wilderness. Sarah shouldered her pack, feeling the familiar weight of her rifle system and supporting equipment. The hike to her shooting position would take 4 hours through terrain that grew increasingly challenging with altitude. Her teammates split off according to the mission plan, moving toward their insertion point several miles away. Sarah would travel alone, following a route that had been carefully planned to avoid known patrol areas and observation points. The isolation didn't bother her. She had always worked best when relying solely on her own skills and judgment. The first 2 hours of hiking passed without incident. Sarah moved carefully through dense forest, using natural cover to mask her presence while maintaining steady progress toward her objective. Her equipment was distributed to minimize noise and avoid snagging on vegetation. Lessons learned through years of operating in similar environments. As she climbed higher, the vegetation thinned and the terrain became more rocky and exposed. This was the dangerous phase of her approach, where she would be most vulnerable to detection by enemy scouts or surveillance systems. Sarah moved from cover to cover, pausing frequently to scan the surrounding area through high-powered binoculars. The target compound came into view as she reached a ridgeline approximately 3 miles from her intended shooting position. Through her spotting scope, Sarah could see the cluster of buildings nestled in the valley below. Intelligence reports had been accurate. The location was well defended with multiple guard positions and what appeared to be heavy weapons emplacements. Sarah continued her approach, using a parallel ridgeline to mask her movement, while maintaining visual contact with the target area. The physical exertion at high altitude was beginning to take its toll, but her training had prepared her for exactly these conditions. Proper hydration and measured breathing kept her performance at acceptable levels. 2 hours before the planned assault, Sarah reached her designated shooting position. The location had been selected based on satellite imagery and ballistic calculations, providing clear lines of sight to key areas of the compound, while offering concealment and multiple escape routes. She immediately began preparing her hide, using natural materials to break up her outline and create a stable shooting platform. The rifle system required careful setup and calibration. Sarah assembled the weapon with practiced efficiency, each component fitting together with precision-engineered tolerances. The scope that had attracted so much attention was mounted and aligned, its sophisticated electronics powered up and running through self-diagnostic routines. Environmental conditions at the shooting position were challenging, but within acceptable parameters. Wind speed was variable but predictable. Temperature was dropping as evening approached and humidity levels were lower than ideal. Sarah recorded all relevant data in her logbook, information that would be crucial for accurate shot placement at extreme range. As she prepared for the mission, Sarah's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. The voice was unfamiliar but carried the authority codes that identified it as coming from the command center. The speaker requested confirmation of her position and equipment status. Standard procedure, but delivered with an intensity that suggested unusual interest in her specific role. Sarah provided the required information, noting that the questioner seemed particularly interested in her scope settings and ammunition selection. The exchange was brief and professional, but it reinforced her growing suspicion that someone was paying very close attention to her activities. The assault team checked in as they reached their final staging position, reporting that enemy activity around the compound had increased significantly over the past hour. Intelligence updates indicated that the target might be preparing to move earlier than expected, potentially accelerating the mission timeline. Sarah adjusted her preparations accordingly, completing her range cards and wind charts ahead of schedule. She had identified multiple shooting positions within her hide, allowing her to engage targets from slightly different angles as the tactical situation developed. Each position had been laser ranged, and the ballistic data computed for the specific environmental conditions. Through her scope, Sarah could see guards moving around the compound perimeter, their patrol patterns becoming more erratic and unpredictable. Thermal imaging revealed additional personnel inside the buildings, including what appeared to be preparations for vehicle movement. The intelligence assessment had been correct. They were running out of time. The radio transmission that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Instead of Colonel Hayes or the mission controller, the voice belonged to the man Sarah had encountered at the training range. He identified himself using classified call signs that confirmed his authority to issue operational orders. speaking with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. The observer informed Sarah that new intelligence had identified additional high-value targets in the compound, requiring her to expand her target set beyond the original mission parameters. The implications were significant. More targets meant more shots, increasing the risk of detection and compromising the extraction phase of the operation. Sarah requested confirmation of the new orders through proper channels, but was told that time constraints made normal verification procedures impossible. The assault team was already in position and counting down to their breach, leaving no opportunity for extended communications protocols. As she prepared to engage multiple targets in rapid succession, Sarah found herself questioning whether this expansion was based on legitimate intelligence or represented something more complex. The observer's voice carried subtle stress indicators that suggested he was operating under pressure from sources unknown to her. The assault began with explosive charges breaching the main compound entrance. Sarah's scope tracked multiple targets as they emerged from buildings in defensive positions, prioritizing threats according to her training and the expanded target list. Her first shot eliminated a guard manning a heavy machine gun position that could have devastated the assault team. Subsequent shots came in rapid succession, each one calculated to remove specific threats or clear pathways for the advancing operators. The suppressor on her rifle reduced the sound signature, but multiple shots from the same position would eventually draw counter-battery fire if enemy forces could locate her position. Sarah's radio filled with reports from the assault team as they cleared buildings and searched for the primary target. The operation was proceeding according to plan, but intelligence updates indicated that reinforcements were approaching the area. Time was running out and the extraction would need to begin soon, regardless of whether all objectives had been achieved. It was during the final phase of the assault that Sarah received the most troubling transmission of the entire mission. The observer's voice came through her earpiece with instructions to engage a target that didn't match any of the original mission parameters or intelligence reports. The individual in question appeared to be a non-combatant, possibly a civilian or intelligence asset rather than a legitimate military target. Sarah's finger hesitated on the trigger as she studied the target through her scope. The individual appeared to be middle-aged, wearing civilian clothes, and showed no signs of carrying weapons or exhibiting hostile behavior. Through the high magnification optics, she could see details that contradicted the observer's assessment of the target as an immediate threat to the mission. The radio crackled with increasing urgency as the observer repeated the engagement order, emphasizing that the target possessed intelligence that could compromise future operations if allowed to escape. Sarah requested additional confirmation from Colonel Hayes or the mission controller, but was told that communications with the primary command element had been temporarily disrupted by electronic interference. Below in the compound, the assault team was completing their sweep of the remaining buildings. They had successfully located and secured the primary target, but enemy reinforcements were approaching rapidly from multiple directions. The extraction window was closing, and every second of delay increased the risk to her teammates' lives. Sarah made a decision that went against every instinct developed through years of military training. She refused the engagement order, informing the observer that the target did not meet the criteria for elimination under the rules of engagement she had been briefed. The response was immediate and harsh, with threats of court-martial and accusations of insubordination under fire. The situation deteriorated rapidly as enemy forces began coordinated counterattacks against the assault team's positions. Sarah shifted her focus to providing covering fire for the extraction, engaging legitimate threats while maintaining her refusal to target the questionable individual. Her shots were precise and effective, eliminating multiple hostiles who posed direct threats to the withdrawal. As the assault team began their fighting retreat toward the extraction point, Sarah received a transmission that changed her understanding of the entire situation. Colonel Hayes' voice came through the radio with authentication codes that confirmed his identity, ordering her to disregard all instructions from unauthorized sources and maintain standard engagement protocols. The revelation that the observer had been operating outside the official chain of command sent chills through Sarah's mind. She realized that she had been manipulated into a position where she might have committed an unauthorized killing, potentially compromising not only her own career but the entire Phantom Unit program. Sarah began her own extraction, disassembling her rifle system and preparing to move from her compromised position. Enemy forces had detected her general location and were beginning to direct indirect fire toward the ridgeline. Mortar rounds impacted within 100 yards of her hide, sending shrapnel whistling overhead. The descent from her shooting position required careful movement through terrain that was now actively being searched by enemy patrols. Sarah used her knowledge of local topography and natural concealment to avoid detection, but the margin for error was rapidly shrinking as more hostile forces entered the area. Her radio provided intermittent updates on the assault team's progress toward the extraction point. They were encountering heavier resistance than anticipated, and several team members had sustained minor injuries during the fighting withdrawal. The helicopter was inbound but would need clear landing zones and suppressive fire to complete the pickup safely. Sarah reached a secondary overwatch position that provided visual contact with the extraction site. Through her scope, she could see her teammates establishing a defensive perimeter while calling in close air support to deal with pursuing enemy forces. Attack helicopters were engaging targets several kilometers away, buying precious time for the extraction to proceed. The civilian target that had caused so much controversy was visible among a group of individuals being evacuated from the compound by unknown personnel. Sarah realized that the person might have been an intelligence asset or undercover operative, which would explain the observer's interest in eliminating them. The implications were staggering. She had been ordered to kill someone who might have been working for American intelligence agencies. As the extraction helicopter approached the landing zone, Sarah provided overwatch fire to suppress enemy positions that could threaten the aircraft. Her shots were carefully placed to avoid civilian casualties while eliminating legitimate military targets. The training and discipline that had made her one of the military's premier marksmen proved invaluable in the complex tactical situation. The assault team successfully boarded the extraction helicopter, but Sarah's own pickup would require a separate flight due to her isolated position. She continued moving toward an alternate landing zone while maintaining radio contact with the rescue coordinators. Enemy search parties were getting closer, forcing her to make increasingly dangerous moves across exposed terrain. During the movement to her extraction point, Sarah's radio intercepted transmissions that revealed the scope of the deception she had encountered. Multiple frequencies carried conversations between the unauthorized observer and unknown parties, discussing the failure to eliminate the civilian target and contingency plans for damage control. The unauthorized observer was identified through voice analysis as a former Navy SEAL named Marcus Reed, who had been discharged from active duty 3 years earlier following an incident involving unauthorized operations in Syria. Intelligence files indicated that Reed had been working as a private contractor for organizations with questionable connections to official government agencies. Sarah realized that she had stumbled into something much larger than a single rogue operative. The fact that Reed had access to classified information about the Phantom unit and current operations suggested a security breach at the highest levels. His ability to insert himself into the mission command structure indicated sophisticated planning and insider knowledge. The extraction helicopter arrived at Sarah's pickup point under heavy fire from enemy positions. She provided covering fire while moving toward the aircraft, using smoke grenades to conceal her approach. The pilot demonstrated exceptional skill in maintaining position, despite ground fire and adverse weather conditions that had developed during the night. As the helicopter lifted off with Sarah aboard, she could see the compound burning in the distance. The mission had achieved its primary objectives, but the unauthorized interference had created complications that would require extensive investigation and damage control. The Phantom unit's cover might have been compromised, potentially ending one of the military's most effective special operations programs. During the flight back to base, Sarah used encrypted communications to brief Colonel Hayes on Reed's unauthorized involvement in the mission. The implications were serious enough to trigger immediate security protocols and investigations by multiple agencies. The fact that Reed had attempted to manipulate a Phantom unit operator into committing an unauthorized killing suggested foreign intelligence involvement or domestic conspiracy. Sarah's refusal to follow Reed's orders had prevented what could have been a catastrophic intelligence failure. But the incident raised questions about operational security that would have far-reaching consequences. The Phantom unit operated in complete secrecy, but Reed's knowledge of their existence and capabilities indicated that their cover had been blown by someone with access to the most classified information. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a federal courthouse in Virginia, her dress uniform bearing the ribbons and decorations earned through years of distinguished service. The trial of Marcus Reed and his co-conspirators had drawn national attention, though much of the evidence remained classified, and the proceedings were conducted under strict security protocols. Her testimony had been delivered behind closed doors, with only essential personnel present to hear the details of how Reed had attempted to manipulate her into committing an unauthorized killing. The prosecution had built a compelling case based on intercepted communications, financial records, and testimony from multiple witnesses who had encountered Reed's organization. Reed himself had maintained his innocence throughout the trial, claiming that he was acting in America's best interest by attempting to eliminate what he believed were foreign intelligence assets. His defense attorneys argued that his military service and patriotic motivations should be considered mitigating factors, but the evidence of his connections to hostile foreign organizations undermined these claims. The jury had deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on charges of espionage, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Reed's handlers had been tried separately, with several receiving lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the conspiracy. The foreign intelligence connections had been exposed through careful, investigative work that traced funding sources and communication networks. Sarah's role in exposing the conspiracy had earned her recognition at the highest levels of government, though most of the awards and commendations would remain classified indefinitely. Her refusal to follow unauthorized orders had prevented what could have been a catastrophic intelligence failure and saved the life of an American operative working in extremely dangerous conditions. The Phantom Unit had been reconstituted under new leadership and enhanced security protocols, but Sarah had chosen not to return to the program. The psychological toll of the Reed incident, combined with years of high-stress operations, had convinced her that it was time to transition to different responsibilities within the military structure. Her new assignment was with the Special Operations Command Training Directorate, where she would help develop curricula and procedures for preparing the next generation of elite operators. The position would allow her to share hard-earned experience while contributing to improvements in operational security and decision-making under pressure. The transition had not been easy. Sarah struggled with nightmares and anxiety related to the mission where Reed had attempted to manipulate her. Professional counseling and support from fellow veterans helped her process the experience and develop coping strategies for managing the psychological aftermath of combat and betray. The debriefing room at the secure facility was filled with faces Sarah didn't recognize, men and women in expensive suits who carried themselves with the authority that came from working in the shadowy world of intelligence and national security. Colonel Hayes sat at one end of the conference table, his expression grim as he reviewed classified documents that had arrived throughout the night. Sarah had been awake for 36 hours straight, but adrenaline and strong coffee kept her alert as she prepared to answer questions about the mission and Reed's unauthorized interference. The stakes were higher than just her own career. The entire Phantom Unit program hung in the balance, and her testimony would help determine whether the operation could continue or would be terminated. Due to security breaches, the lead investigator introduced herself as Director Catherine Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency, a woman whose reputation for thorough investigations and ruthless pursuit of security threats was legendary within the intelligence community. Walsh's first questions focused on Sarah's initial encounter with Reed at the training range, probing for details that might reveal how he had gained access to classified facilities and information. Sarah recounted the encounter with precision, describing Reed's behavior, apparent knowledge of specialized equipment, and obvious recognition of the Phantom Unit insignia. Walsh took extensive notes, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details that seemed insignificant but apparently held greater meaning within the context of the investigation. The questioning continued for hours, covering every aspect of the mission from initial briefing through final extraction. Sarah's account was corroborated by recordings from the command center and testimonies from other team members, building a comprehensive picture of how Reed had inserted himself into the operational chain of command. The most troubling revelations came from technical Analysis of the communication intercepts Sarah had collected during the mission. Intelligence specialists had identified multiple parties involved in coordinating with Reed, including individuals with connections to foreign intelligence services and domestic organizations with anti-government agendas. Director Walsh revealed that Reed's activities were part of a larger investigation that had been running for several months. The former SEAL had been under surveillance since his discharge from active duty, but his access to current operational intelligence had surprised even experienced counterintelligence officers. The breach represented a fundamental failure of security protocols that protected the nation's most sensitive military operations. Sarah learned that the civilian target Reed had ordered her to eliminate was indeed an American intelligence asset who had been working undercover to penetrate terrorist organizations in the region. Reed's attempt to have the operative killed would have eliminated a valuable source of intelligence while potentially exposing other assets in the network. The implications extended far beyond a single mission or even the Phantom Unit program. Reed's handlers appeared to have detailed knowledge of multiple special operations units, their capabilities, and current deployments. The security breach could compromise ongoing missions around the world and endanger the lives of operators who believed their identities and activities were protected by classification systems. As the investigation continued, Sarah was assigned to a safe house while security specialists worked to determine the full extent of the compromise. Her own safety was a concern, as Reed's organization might view her as a threat due to her role in exposing their operation. Armed guards and electronic surveillance protected the facility around the clock. During her time at the safe house, Sarah received visits from various officials who provided updates on the investigation and sought additional details about her experiences. The scope of the conspiracy was expanding as investigators traced Reed's connections and identified other individuals who might have been involved in the security breach. Colonel Hayes brought news that the Phantom Unit was being temporarily suspended while security protocols were reviewed and updated. The other team members had been reassigned to conventional units pending resolution of the investigation. Years of training and mission preparation had been effectively eliminated by a single security failure. The psychological impact of the situation weighed heavily on Sarah as she considered how close she had come to making a decision that would have haunted her forever. Reed's manipulation had been sophisticated and nearly successful, exploiting the trust and discipline that made special operations possible. The fact that she had refused the unauthorized order was the only reason the investigation had a chance of success. Intelligence analysts briefed Sarah on Reed's background and the events that had led to his discharge from active duty. The incident in Syria had involved unauthorized operations against targets that Reed believed posed threats to American personnel. His superiors had determined that he had exceeded his authority and placed civilian lives at risk through reckless actions. After his discharge, Reed had struggled to adapt to civilian life and had become involved with private military contractors who operated in legal and ethical gray areas. His specialized skills and insider knowledge made him valuable to organizations that needed expertise in special operations, planning, and execution. The investigation revealed that Reed's current employers had connections to foreign intelligence services that were interested in disrupting American special operations capabilities. By compromising the Phantom Unit and similar programs, they hoped to reduce America's ability to conduct sensitive missions in contested regions around the world. Sarah's role in exposing the conspiracy had made her a target, but it had also positioned her as a key witness in prosecuting those responsible for the security breach. Federal prosecutors were preparing cases against multiple defendants, including Reed and his handlers, based on evidence collected during the investigation. The safe house became her temporary home as the legal proceedings developed. Sarah used the time to maintain her physical fitness and study advanced tactics and techniques that might be useful in future assignments. Despite the uncertainty about her career, she remained committed to serving her country in whatever capacity would be available. News arrived that other special operations units had been compromised through similar infiltration attempts. Reed's organization had been more successful than initially believed, penetrating multiple classified programs and gathering intelligence that could be used to disrupt American military capabilities worldwide. The counterintelligence response involved Hundreds of investigators from multiple agencies working to identify compromised personnel, secure sensitive information, and prevent further breaches. The investigation had become one of the largest security failures in modern military history, with implications that would affect special operations for years to come. Sarah received word that her testimony would be crucial in upcoming court proceedings, but that her future assignments remained unclear pending resolution of the security review. The Phantom Unit might be reconstituted with new protocols and personnel, or it might be permanently dissolved depending on the investigation's final conclusions. As weeks passed in the safe house, Sarah reflected on the events that had led to this situation. Her decision to refuse Reed's unauthorized order had been instinctive, based on training and moral principles that had been instilled throughout her military career. The consequences of that decision were still unfolding, but she remained convinced that she had made the right choice regardless of the personal cost.